There was a half-naked stranger in my pool drinking boxed wine and claiming she had a legal right to be there because, in her words, the water spiritually belongs to the community. That was the exact moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a nosy neighbor or an eccentric woman. I was dealing with a full-blown suburban tyrant named Karen, and I had just become her summer obsession. It all started a few weeks before that bizarre scene when I had quietly finished building my dream retirement pool behind my barn. I'm not the flashy type. No bright tiles, no water slides, just a clean, blue rectangular lap pool surrounded by citrus trees and a sturdy privacy fence. As a retired military man and lifelong farmer, this was my one big treat after decades of hard work in raising livestock through Texas droughts and wild seasons. I didn't tell anyone about it except my buddy Dan and my goat Pickles. I even kept the gate locked with a keypad. It was my sanctuary, meant for peaceful floating with iced tea and country music on low volume. No one was invited. No one except me. Then came Karen. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first saw her standing at my gate with a clipboard and sunglasses the size of Texas, tapping a pen against her mouth like she was conducting a federal inspection. I walked up, thinking maybe she was lost or looking for someone. Before I could say a word, she squinted through the fence and said, "Hi, I'm Karen. I represent the HOA, and I'm here to talk about your pool." I told her I wasn't part of the HOA, that I owned my land outright and it was zoned agricultural. She blinked at me like I had spoken a different language, then chuckled and said, "Yes, but all land is part of the community, right? Especially water access." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She started listing reasons why my pool should be shared, from communal health benefits to environmental harmony to something about neighborhood morale. I cut her off and said firmly, "It's private. Please don't trespass." 2 days later, I found a laminated flyer zip-tied to my gate. It was titled Pool Access for Neighbors, with a printed schedule and a list of rules. Tuesday mornings were apparently senior splash, and Thursday evenings were wine and float. I tore it down and assumed that would be the end of it. It wasn't. On Friday, I came home from town to see 4 women in oversized hats and floaties standing at my gate, sipping sodas and asking how to get in. One even waved and said, "Karen said we could come early." That's when I knew this was no ordinary nuisance. This was an invasion disguised as entitlement. I politely told them to leave and added a second lock to the gate that night. I installed motion cameras and called Dan to vent. Dan howled with laughter and said, "Buddy, you're in a suburban war now. Godspeed." Things escalated fast. Karen showed up the next morning with a fake HOA citation that she handed to me over the fence. It claimed I owed $500 for operating an unsanctioned aquatic facility within neighborhood boundaries. The letterhead looked official at first glance, but then I saw it had typos, a fake phone number, and was signed in purple gel pen. I asked her if this was a prank. She stared, dead serious, and said, "If you ignore this, you'll leave me no choice but to involve the community board." I told her again that I wasn't part of her HOA and that she was trespassing. She said she was merely delivering notices as a representative of shared space. I said she was lucky I hadn't released Pickles, who had a history of headbutting anyone wearing perfume. She didn't find that funny. Later that day, I caught her on camera leaning over the fence with her phone, taking photos of the pool. She even tried to scan the keypad with a flashlight. That night, I uploaded the footage to my old Facebook page with the caption, "When the HOA meets the farm." It got dozens of laughing emojis and a few, "Oh Lord, not Karen" comments from locals. That gave me an idea. I printed a small wooden sign and mounted it to the fence. "Not a community pool. Private. Trespassers will be goat." Dan nearly cried from laughing when he saw it, but Karen didn't back off. She started handing out flyers again, this time promising a community wellness retreat hosted at a local pool generously located on community-adjacent land. That's how she described my yard. I confronted her one last time in person. She stood with one hand on her hip, oversized sunglasses reflecting the sky, and told me, "Water is life. You can't gatekeep life." I said, "Watch me." Then I closed the gate. That night, while sitting by the pool and watching Pickles chew on a towel he stole from my laundry line, I realized I was dealing with someone who truly believed that made-up authority gave her the right to rewrite reality. And the only way to deal with people like that wasn't with polite words or another sign. It was time to dig deeper. I called Marcy, a retired lawyer I'd served with who knew land use law better than anyone. When I explained what was happening, she paused and said, "You're zoned agricultural, right?" I said, "Yes." She replied, "Then she just picked the wrong fight." I smiled. Karen had no idea that her war over my pool was about to backfire so hard she'd wish she'd never seen a drop of water in her life. The sun was barely up when I found the next surprise taped to my gate. It was a thick envelope sealed with a printed HOA logo and stuffed with 3 pages of nonsense. The top page was a fabricated violation summary citing me for non-compliance with neighborhood recreational space rules. The second was a warning notice of pending community fines totaling $1,000 if I didn't grant shared access to what they called the South Pool sector. And the third page, the cherry on top, was a proposed monthly calendar for community usage, complete with themed swim days and Karen listed as the pool access coordinator. I stared at it for a full minute before bursting out laughing. The gall of this woman was unbelievable. She had taken her delusion to the next level, now fully committing to the idea that she had some kind of legal claim over my private pool, even inventing positions and paperwork to support it. That afternoon, Dan dropped by with a bag of goat feed and a 6-pack. He'd already heard about the latest HOA stunt through one of his cousins. According to him, she was telling everyone that I had agreed to open the pool to the community but was just working out some final adjustments. It was one thing to trespass and make fake citations. Now she was spreading lies in public, trying to make it seem like I was in agreement with her madness. I didn't want to involve the sheriff yet, that was a last resort, but I needed to stop her before someone actually believed her. So I printed a batch of flyers of my own. They were simple black and white with big bold letters that read, "This pool is private property. Not affiliated with any HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I added a picture of pickles for flair. I posted them at the mailbox cluster near the trailhead where Karen often walked and at the community notice board by the diner. I figured that would slow her down. It didn't. The next morning, a woman I barely knew knocked on my door wearing flip-flops and holding a cooler. She looked confused when I answered and said, "I'm here for the community float session." I asked her if Karen sent her. She said yes. I told her the truth. Her eyes went wide. She apologized and left immediately. I called Dan again. This time we went driving. We found more flyers posted in plastic sleeves on lampposts and mailboxes, all featuring the same schedule and Karen's ridiculous HOA insignia. One even had a logo that said, Pool Justice League. Dan said she's lost her mind. I said she's about to lose more than that. That evening, I started collecting every flyer I could find and snapping photos for documentation. If she wanted to play games with fake authority, I'd meet her with real rules and real consequences. The next phase of her assault came 2 days later when I caught her inside my property again, this time with 3 guests. They were lounging by the pool in folding chairs, sipping wine coolers like it was a public resort. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I walked straight to the side gate, locked it from the outside, and called the sheriff's office to report trespassers on agricultural property. They arrived 20 minutes later. I showed them the camera footage, the printed flyers, and explained everything from the fake citations to the unauthorized event. The deputies were polite but clearly amused. One of them even asked if I wanted to press charges. I said, "Not yet. Just a written warning." Karen threw a fit, claimed she had verbal permission, and tried to use the words, "neighborhood collective" 4 times in the span of 2 minutes. The deputy shut her down fast. "Ma'am, this isn't an HOA property. This is privately owned agricultural land. You're trespassing." Karen looked like someone had told her Santa Claus wasn't real. She was forced to leave, red-faced and fuming, but I knew that wasn't the end. That was just her regrouping. The next morning I found my pool gate had been tampered with. Someone had scratched the keypad and left behind an empty wine bottle and 2 deflated floaties. That's when I upgraded. I installed motion lights, reinforced the gate with a secondary latch, and added another camera facing the outer fence. I was no longer just dealing with delusion, I was dealing with sabotage. I called Marcy, explained everything in detail and asked what kind of legal protections I had. She told me she'd look into it and call me back the next day. That evening I got a knock on my door. It was another neighbor, this time an older man named Roy who lived 2 streets down. He looked embarrassed and handed me one of Karen's newest flyers. She was now claiming to be organizing a neighborhood donation drive to help maintain shared resources, including the community pool. I nearly choked. She had included a PayPal link and her phone number. Roy said, "I don't agree with her. I just thought you should see this." I thanked him and told him the truth. His jaw dropped. He promised to spread the word. Maybe, just maybe, that would start turning the tide. But Karen wasn't slowing down. She was doubling down, and something told me the next move would be bigger, louder, bolder. She had tasted imaginary power and wasn't ready to give it up. so I stayed one step ahead. I wasn't just defending a pool anymore, I was defending my land, my peace, and my sanity. And the next phase of my plan was going to make sure Karen finally learned what happens when you mess with the wrong farmer. Marcy pulled up the original property deeds from the county office. My land, all 6 acres of it, had been zoned agricultural since my grandfather bought it. That zoning came with exemptions most neighborhoods didn't have. I wasn't beholden to HOA regulations or any community recreational laws. But what made things really interesting was the fine print under the land use clause. The pool, if listed as a livestock hydration structure, or agricultural water reservoir, couldn't legally be accessed by the public. Not only that, but trespassing into an agricultural water source carried heavier fines and possible felony charges. Marcy grinned as she explained it. She said Karen might have messed with the wrong patch of dirt. The moment we reclassified the pool as a functional agricultural feature, it would be protected on a state level, not just from Karen but from any future HOA lunacy. I spent the next day filling out paperwork, submitting documents to the county, and getting an official inspection. The inspector was a grizzled man named Tom who raised alpacas in his spare time. When he saw the pool, he raised one eyebrow and asked where the livestock were. I pointed to Pickles, who was lounging in the shade. Tom chuckled and said, "Close enough." He stamped the form, shook my hand, and left. 2 days later, the paperwork came back approved. The pool was now legally classified as a livestock hydration unit, with the agricultural code clearly listed. I framed the certificate and hung it in my barn right next to an old photo of my grandfather holding a shovel. That same day, I made new signs for the fence. This time they weren't just warnings, they quoted the law. No trespassing. Agricultural water supply. Violators subject to state penalties. That evening, I sent a certified letter to Karen. Inside was a copy of the reclassification notice, a cease and desist order prepared by Marcy, and a printed photo of her trespassing with a timestamp. It was direct, legal, and final. The next morning, I watched from my porch as Karen opened the letter in her driveway. I couldn't hear her, but I could see the way her shoulders stiffened and her jaw clenched. She crumpled the paper, stormed inside, and didn't come out for the rest of the day. Still, the following afternoon proved otherwise. She returned, not with flyers or citations, but with a man in a polo shirt and khakis. They stood at the gate, whispering, pointing at the signs, occasionally glancing toward the house. I walked over calmly and asked what they wanted. The man introduced himself as a private inspector sent by the HOA to conduct a regulatory compliance check on the pool. I told him 2 things. First, this property isn't part of any HOA, and second, the pool is an agricultural structure now protected under state code. I asked for his credentials. He couldn't produce any. I told them both to leave or I'd call the sheriff again. Karen tried to protest, claiming the community had a moral right to access. I told her that if she said the word community one more time, I'd release the goat. That ended the conversation quickly. A few days passed in relative silence. No new flyers, no visitors, no balloons. I started to think the storm had finally blown over. Then I got a call from the county office. Someone had filed a complaint alleging misuse of agricultural zoning and improper water storage. I didn't need to guess who it was. The county rep said they were required to follow up, but everything seemed in order based on the documents already submitted. I told them they were welcome to inspect the property again. They thanked me and never followed up. Karen had tried to use the system against me and failed. But she wasn't giving up. That weekend, I found a group of her friends walking the perimeter of my fence with their phones out, filming everything. I stood on my porch with a glass of lemonade and waved. They didn't wave back. That same night, I got an idea. If Karen wanted to treat my pool like a public facility, maybe it was time to give her a taste of what that really looked like. I rearranged the lounge chairs, added a few buckets labeled Goat Rinse Station, and placed large salt blocks along the edge of the water. I even made laminated signs that said livestock only, and hung them by the gate. I wanted to send a message that even if she got over the fence, she'd be stepping into something no longer resembling a summer paradise. Dan came by and nearly cried laughing when he saw the new setup. Pickles, meanwhile, had taken to dipping his front hooves into the shallow end like it was his personal spa. As the sun set, I sat back in my chair and realized something important. I wasn't just fighting Karen. I was protecting something bigger, my right to peace, my land, my life. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Ready for whatever Karen tried next, because now the law wasn't just on my side, it was written in stone. Or at least in county records. And that was more than enough for me. It was around 5:30 in the morning when I woke to the sound of a dull clang and something metallic scraping against the fence. I threw on my boots, grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The early morning air was still and thick with humidity. I crept toward the back gate where the pool was fenced off and found the latch halfway lifted, the keypad scratched again, and a faint trail of muddy footprints leading back toward the side trail. I checked the cameras once daylight broke and there it was, Karen in a sun hat and pajama pants, holding a broomstick with duct tape wrapped around one end, poking through the gap in the gate to lift the latch. She didn't even bother looking at the cameras this time. She slipped inside for 5 minutes, took a selfie near the pool, then left like nothing happened. I sent the footage to Marcy, who called back 15 minutes later and said that was enough. It was time to document everything and prepare a legal response that would finally stick. Before we could even draft it, Karen struck again. This time it wasn't subtle. It was Sunday afternoon when I noticed a group of people walking toward my property, all dressed like they were headed to a pool party, beach bags, towels, sunglasses, and even an inflatable flamingo. They weren't sneaking around or pretending. They walked right up to the gate like they belonged there. One woman called out, saying they were there for the community splash mixer. I told them the pool wasn't open to anyone but livestock. They looked confused, then pulled out a flyer, another one of Karen's, this time designed like a formal event invitation, complete with RSVP instructions and a line at the bottom that read, "By invitation of pool coordinator Karen." Later that night, I posted an update to the local community group online, attaching photos of the flyers, screenshots of the security footage, and an open message to Karen. It was short and to the point. This pool is not a community resource. This land is private and agricultural. Any further trespassing will be pursued through legal channels. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the motion sensor lights flashed. I opened the app on my phone and watched as Karen walked right into frame, holding something under a blanket. She ducked under the gate's side hinge, reached through a gap she'd carved in the wire mesh earlier, and slipped inside. Then she did something truly bizarre. She walked to the edge of the pool, knelt down, and gently lowered what looked like a handful of bath bombs into the shallow end. The water fizzed and foamed. Then she stood, took another selfie and left. By morning the entire pool was cloudy and covered in bubbles. I had to drain and flush the system, which cost a full day of labor and a decent amount of water. She hadn't just trespassed, she had contaminated the livestock tank. That, legally, was sabotage. That afternoon, I drove into town to get supplies and bumped into Tom, the agricultural inspector. I told him what happened. He didn't laugh this time. He gave me a form to file a formal complaint for tampering with certified agricultural infrastructure that carried penalties far beyond a simple trespass, fines, a possible court appearance, maybe even a protective order. I thanked him and went straight to Marcy's office. She helped me fill out everything, added the latest footage to the case file, and submitted it to the county. It wasn't long before we were in court. When my name was called and I stepped forward with Marcy by my side, I felt a weight in my chest. Karen was already there, sitting straight-backed in a floral dress with her lawyer beside her, wearing an expression like she was attending a charity fundraiser. The judge asked a few questions, looked over the documents and said something I'll never forget. If this footage is real, then this is not a matter of misunderstanding. This is a matter of consistent and intentional boundary violations. Karen's lawyer tried to argue the footage was edited, but Marcy had already brought the raw security files on a flash drive. The judge agreed to set a full hearing for the following month. When the final ruling came, the judge issued a formal no-contact order preventing Karen from approaching my property ever again. She fined Karen for vandalism and trespassing and ordered her to pay restitution for damages and court costs. A week later, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's house. No goodbyes, no final words. She left quietly, the same way she should have handled things from the beginning. I decided to commemorate the end of the madness in my own way. I built a small wooden deck next to the pool and nailed a sign to the railing. It read, "Karen Free Zone." Underneath it, I added another in smaller letters, "No trespassing. No flyers. No flamingos." I learned something from all of it. Boundaries matter, not just fences and signs but the invisible lines between what's right and what's ridiculous. Karen tried to blur those lines with flyers and noise and soap bubbles, but in the end the law and the land stood firm. And so did I. Sometimes peace takes work. Sometimes you have to fight for your quiet. But when you finally get it, when the water is still and the world is calm and the goat is snoring in the sun, it feels like victory. Not loud or flashy. Just steady and earned.